Well, everyone, welcome. This is a webinar about beliefs. What are they? How are they formed? And how do we change them? My name is Jay Otto. I'm a researcher with the Center for Health and Safety Culture, and I'm very pleased to be able to present with our director, Nick Ward. First, we just want to do a little bit of setup about webinar. I think we've all gotten used to these platforms, but nonetheless, first, before that even, we want to acknowledge that this is a project that is sponsored by the Traffic Safety Culture Transportation Pooled Fund Program. You can see the number of participating states. This is a pooled fund which is managed by MDT, or the Montana Department of Transportation. If you are interested in joining as a state, we'd love to have you participate in this ongoing research. The pooled funds operate in 5-year cycles, and you can join at any time. You do not have to be a Department of Transportation. Any kind of organization can join. So you can reach out to MDT. They're going through a transition with a new leader. We're very excited about that. Sue Sillick managed it for many years. She is retired, so the leadership is transitioning. But this is a formal research project which they sponsored. You can learn more about the other projects that they've sponsored on their website, as well as review, and we'll talk about gain access to the resources about this project, as well as the final report, as well as look at other projects. So just a little bit about WebEx. If at any time you have issues with your audio, you can reach down to the 3 dots at the bottom to help connect audio in different ways. You can use voice over internet, or you can have the system call your phone. You can also use the chat box or the Q&A box to send us questions. Feel free to do that during the presentation. I will be keeping my eye on those throughout the presentation. If it's appropriate, we'll try to answer them in the middle, or we'll also have a chance at the end to address questions. So you can use the chat box or the Q&A to do that. We're also going to do a poll, and that is a little window will pop up on your screen, and you'll just answer that, and we'll look at some of those results very quickly. A little bit about the center. We are the Center for Health and Safety Culture. We're located at Montana State University. We're a very interdisciplinary center. We have individuals and staff with background in psychology, public health, developmental psychology, sociology, engineering, health promotion, prevention. And so we really look at those we use those different disciplines to have a wide, diverse look at our understanding of this idea of health and safety culture. And in particular, we're interested how people's shared values and beliefs influence their decisions, and particularly decisions that impact health and safety. All of our research is very applied, so we're often doing projects at the community or state level, really trying to move the needle on particular issues. We also consider training and guidance a critical part of our work as well. How do we bring the knowledge and transfer the technology out to the folks who are doing the work? We do a lot of work in different issues. We do a lot of work in traffic safety, as we'll be talking about, as this is funded by the pooled fund and on traffic safety culture. But we historically have done a lot of work around preventing the misuse of substances. Also have done some work looking at domestic violence, interpersonal violence, as well as child well-being, child maltreatment. And it's interesting that these issues clearly intersect. We know that the misuse of substances is a major component of traffic safety. We also understand that early childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, can be contributing factors to later involvement with violence, but also the misuse of substances. Our PhD student has been exploring the intersection of emotional intelligence and traffic safety. So many of these ideas are connected, and we really enjoy working on these different issues and see how they are addressed similarly and differently at the federal, state, and local levels. So I'd now like to open up a quick poll, and I just want to ask you, what do you think? Do you see your work to improve traffic safety as primarily about changing behavior or changing beliefs? So what do you think? Just jump in, give your answers to that. It's a bit, maybe a bit of an ambiguous question, I don't know. Some of you might be looking for more options, but we're just going to force you into those two just to get us started for today. So quickly give your reaction, give a few more minutes. Over half of you have responded. We appreciate that. Few more, give you a little bit more time. All right, so I'm going to give you about 15 seconds more to respond. Chime in, we'll see what you think. All right. So what we saw, what you all responded, was about, open this up a little bit. Yeah, about 25% of you said changing behavior. About 29% of you said changing beliefs. And about a third of you weren't willing to commit, didn't answer. So that's okay too. So we just wanted to get our heads a little bit in that space to think about the work that I think we're all involved in, which is ultimately, I think, very much around changing behavior. However, we at the center would really look at this work that we are seeking to change behavior through the work of changing beliefs. So at the center, we use this definition for traffic safety culture: the shared belief system of a group of people which influences road user behaviors and stakeholder actions that impact traffic safety. We are not claiming that this is the only definition of culture or the definition of culture, but it is a definition of traffic safety culture, which we really like because it allows us to be able to measure it, to define how we might want to improve it, and then work on countermeasures or strategies to grow it. I think it's really important to recognize that it is a shared belief system. It's not that everybody has the beliefs, but we might say that most people have the beliefs. And it's of various groups of people. Often I think in traffic safety, we do a lot of focus, as is appropriate, on road users and in particular drivers. However, we have to recognize that there are many other stakeholders who have a profound impact on road user behavior, road user beliefs. So we need to think about engineers. We need to think about planners. We need to think about elected officials and their funding decisions. We need to think about law enforcement, public health. We need to think about workplaces. I mean, what actions can workplaces take that might impact traffic safety? So there are a wide array of groups of people and a wide array of actions. And for each of those actions, we may be looking at different kinds of belief systems. And a lot of our work at the center is to try to understand what are the belief systems that influence particular actions among different stakeholders and road users. And then how might we develop strategies or countermeasures to grow belief systems that are more supportive of healthy and safe behaviors? And that was really the context that this project came from. We understand that a lot of our work is around growing this idea of traffic safety culture, and inherently that's going to involve understanding, measuring, and changing beliefs. So that was really how we, what led us to this project. So the purpose of this project was to understand the processes and conditions that influence belief formation and change. Certainly when we think about traffic safety culture, we want to think about, well, how do people originally develop their beliefs about traffic safety? If we could influence the original development, it might be easier to do it there than to change beliefs. But we also know that we need to change beliefs. And we wanted to look at how we could provide guidance to a wide variety of stakeholders around safety that might influence how they design or implement effective strategies to change traffic safety culture, right? Because clearly we need to do better. We have too many fatalities and serious injuries. So we're going to need to change beliefs. We're going to need to change beliefs across the entire social environment, from road users to families to workplaces, organizations, elected officials, all the way across. So that's how we came to this project and the real purpose of the project. So with that, a brief agenda, Nick is going to take us through the review of literature that he did to inform what our beliefs, how our beliefs formed, how our beliefs changed. And then I'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the resources we developed, as well as we'll both address any questions that you have. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Jay. Welcome, everybody. Let's start off with the question again. Why are we focusing on beliefs in this presentation? Why are beliefs important to the work we're doing to try and improve traffic safety through safer road user behaviors and stakeholder actions that support our strategies, such as Vision Zero? Well, this is a diagram that we use in our work to help operationalize traffic safety culture. And on the right side, we have the behavior that we're trying to grow. We're either trying to reduce risky behavior, or such as speeding, or we're trying to grow protective behavior, such as wearing a seatbelt. And our particular focus on behavior is deliberate behavior. That is behavior that comes from a choice or a decision, where there's some willingness or intention to engage in the behavior. And then the question becomes, where does our willingness and intention come from? And this model, which combines a number of psychosocial models of behavioral choice, identifies a whole number of different kinds of cognitions or beliefs which are believed to predict or influence our willingness and intention. And here we've listed a number of those beliefs: values, what we find important to us; behavioral beliefs, what we think the consequences of our behaviors are; normative beliefs, what we think most people do or most people expect us to do; and control beliefs, sort of self-efficacy, our beliefs in ourselves in performing the particular behavior. And these influence subsequent forms of beliefs, attitudes, and so forth, which we won't go into detail here. But all I'm trying to convey to you now, hit the next slide, Jay, is that we have this system of beliefs, a belief system, different types of beliefs, which we use in deciding what actions to take. This belief system influences our willingness, our intentions to do the safe thing or the risky thing. And by understanding those beliefs and their relationship to our decisions, we can start to develop effective and sustainable strategies that will change the behaviors we're seeking to have in our communities. So that's why we're focusing on beliefs. They are the starting point of decisions to engage in safer behaviors. So we need to understand those as the basis for our culture-based strategies. Next slide. So beliefs is one of those words that we use all the time. It's a very common word, but to understand how to use beliefs, how to measure beliefs, how to create strategies to change beliefs, we need to go a little deeper to understand exactly what we mean by beliefs, forming some common language and understanding about what beliefs mean. Next slide. So one of the first things, and one of my favorite statements, talks about our minds and how we function as humans, interacting and understanding our world that we live in. And this notion of our mind being belief engines, I found very appealing. The idea is, as sentient beings, our minds are belief engines that automatically and continuously, whether consciously or unconsciously, try to gain meaning from our environments as we interact with them. So consciously or unconsciously, our minds are always asking questions with each new experience. What is that? Why did that happen? And how do I feel? It's generating these beliefs, and some of those beliefs become sustained and integrated into our belief system. So our starting point is that our mind is a belief engine that is continuously and automatically, perhaps sometimes unconsciously generating beliefs to help us get meaning about the world we're interacting with. Next. Why do we generate beliefs? Well, the research suggests there are two functional reasons as to why we form beliefs. The first, which I alluded to before, is to gain understanding of the world, to be able to have beliefs that represent the world in an accurate, stable way so that we have some understanding and ability to predict what's going to happen in our world. We call that function representational accuracy. How well do our beliefs represent the reality of the world that we're interacting with? The second function, though, and it's important to recognize that beliefs have both these functions, because without understanding that, it's going to be hard to change beliefs. We need to recognize that beliefs have both functions, and our strategies need to reflect those two functions. The second function of beliefs is basically to make us feel better. Choosing to have a certain belief versus not having a belief can help us control our emotions. If we let go of a belief that makes us uncomfortable, we're going to feel better. If we adopt a belief that brings us happiness or joy or a sense of confidence, we will. So we also need to recommend that recognize in addition to forming beliefs to represent our world, we're also forming beliefs that help us regulate our emotions. Next. So what do beliefs actually form as or look like? A lot of research way back into early philosophy discusses beliefs as being propositions. And by propositions, we're simply saying beliefs are statements about the world, and that we form these statements and hold them as beliefs, whether unconsciously or consciously, as representations of that world. So for example, if we perceive everyone I know drives above the speed limit, that could be distilled into a statement, most people speed, and that becomes the belief. We're taking our perceptions, we convert them into statements, and psychologists and philosophers have argued that our beliefs are stored and thought about as statements about the world. Next. Beliefs are important. They're important to our survival as a species. They serve two important functions for us. One is having beliefs let us explain past behavior. Why did I do that? Why did he do that? If we have beliefs, we can explain that behavior. So why did I speed to work last week? Well, most people do. I can explain and form a rational explanation as to why I engaged in a behavior. I can also use these beliefs to motivate and anticipate what I might do in the future. I'm going to speed tomorrow because most people do in Montana. So beliefs also serve the function of motivating and anticipating future behaviors, in addition to explaining the past behaviors in ourselves and others. Next. Beliefs are not just there for belief's sake. Beliefs are a component, an input to lots of other higher cognitive functions, such as decision making and planning. The decisions we make about where to go on a vacation, who to vote for, whether to drive after having alcohol, planning to wear our seatbelt in the future. Our beliefs are inputs to those higher level cognitive functions. They inform decision making and future planning. So they're inputs to higher level cognitive functioning. And it's these higher level cognitive functions, the decision to drive drunk or not drive drunk, that we're trying to influence by changing the beliefs that are impacting those higher level cognitive functions. Next. And as Jay pointed out, the particular aspect of beliefs that we're focusing on is beliefs as it relates to culture. And here we're looking at what is the function of beliefs shared amongst a group of people. And in our application, we're focusing on how this shared belief system is part of a group's identity, which not only defines the group's culture, but also influences the group's collective behavior. So in this case, shared beliefs has a social function as well of defining the identity of groups under this shared belief system. Next, Jay. So how are beliefs formed? If we want to develop strategies to change beliefs, a good starting point is to understand how beliefs form in the first place. And this is a simple model I'll walk through briefly that you can read more about in the project deliverables on the website, which explains how beliefs are formed. And the starting point, next, is this idea of a precursor event. Some event happens which triggers the formation of beliefs. And a precursor event is basically a perturbance. A disturbance, something novel, unexpected, something that seems to contradict our expectations, something which creates a new emotion that we are reacting to. Something disturbs us. There's to quote Star Wars, there's a disturbance in the Force. And it motivates us to think about what was that? Why? What just happened? And you then shift into this more analytical analysis framework, which begins a process of forming beliefs. Next. So faced with this perturbance, you shift into this meaning search mode. You are trying to understand what you don't understand. And part of that process is to generate what are called proto-beliefs. And proto-beliefs are initial ideas or concepts or thoughts that might explain the situation that you're not able to understand at the moment. They're basically personal hypotheses. It might be this, it might be that. Could it be this? What ifs? All these sort of exploratory hypothesis generating efforts go on at this stage, and you end up with a number of proto-beliefs which are not yet accepted. They are candidates for what might be a possible explanation. Next. Having got this set of proto-beliefs, these personal hypotheses, you essentially test those hypotheses to see which are most feasible. You evaluate the plausibility of these proto-beliefs. And there are several things that we do, consciously or unconsciously, when we're evaluating these proto-beliefs. The first is, how accurately do we think they reflect reality? Is this really a good explanation? Does it really explain it? We also look at how well this proto-belief impacts us emotionally. Does it make us feel good or make us feel bad? And the third thing is this particular proto-belief consistent with or contradicts the existing belief system I have? Humans have this built-in need to feel consistent in what they do and how they think. And adopting a belief which contradicts something they're already doing or contradicts another belief leads to what's called cognitive dissonance, and it's very unpalatable to humans. So it's difficult for us to accept a belief that suggests we're inconsistent in our behaviors or our belief system. So one of the evaluations we do, and aside from accuracy and emotional impact, is how does it fit with our existing belief system? Next. So once we've weeded out the weak proto-beliefs, either because they don't seem accurate enough, or they make us feel bad, or they lead to some internal consistency, the best beliefs that remain, that make us feel consistent, that seem to be accurate and make us feel good, we tend to accept those beliefs and they become integrated into our belief system. We now shift from a proto-belief to an actual accepted integrated belief. Next. And now that belief, that new belief, is part of our belief system. It will influence what future events our experiences, perturbances or not. So with this new belief, if something else happens that isn't consistent with that belief, it will become a perturbance and we'll repeat the whole cycle again. So that's the general process that literature suggests we go through, not always intentionally, but we move through this process as we form beliefs. So understanding this gives us some framework to work with if we want to change beliefs. As Jay will talk about later, creating these precursor events is one way to trigger people into the belief assessment mode, which is part of the process of developing new beliefs. Next. So how are beliefs formed? This is another part of we've talked about this a bit before, but we talked about the accuracy versus the emotional aspects of it. And this little graphic on the right sort of highlights the fact that we're forming beliefs for two different reasons. One is to accurately represent reality. The second is to control our emotions, specifically to remove stress, preferably to achieve some positive emotion. And certain beliefs don't always achieve both. So when we're trying to change people's beliefs, it's useful to think of this framework, what are we trying to change and how may people be reacting to this new belief we're trying to instill? Are we able to show them that it's accurate? Will they accept it as accurate? And what are the impacts of this belief on how they're going to feel? So what we're aiming for really is the top right corner where the belief we're trying to instill is accurate and it makes the audience feel good. The beliefs work together. So if you're a tennis player and didn't do well, I did not win because I didn't train enough. That could be the truth. Maybe you went on vacation and didn't train at all. But by accepting that belief, you also feel better than if you said, I just suck. So that kind of belief satisfies both. It makes the person feel good and it's also accurate. And that's what we're trying to achieve because those are going to stick better because they support both the accuracy function and the emotional function. At the other end, you've got beliefs that do neither, dysfunctional beliefs. We will be killed by aliens. Hopefully not accurate. And for most people, it'll be very stressful to believe that. So we don't want to go there, and that's has no functional utility anyway to go there. The trade-offs become whether we're able to, when we're trying to change beliefs, if they serve one but not the other. So in that case, you have competing aspects to the beliefs. It may serve accuracy, but it's detrimental to emotions or vice versa. So the belief, I am overweight, may be accurate, but you're not going to feel good. And I will not get lung cancer by smoking may make you feel good and continue the behavior, but it's not accurate. So as we put together strategies to change beliefs, we're trying to move to the top right corner. What beliefs do we want to grow that are emotionally appealing and accurate? That's our target quadrant to work in. Next slide. So talked a bit about a general framework for how beliefs initially form. Talked about the two functions, accuracy and emotion, and how that sort of can lead to the desired quadrant of instilling beliefs that satisfy both those functions. We also in this project looked at some factors that facilitate belief change. So once we've got this precursor event, the perturbance that starts the belief change process, the belief formation process, what other factors can we leverage to be more efficient and effective in reaching the belief change we're seeking? And I'll just talk briefly about a number of those. Next. The first is what's often referred to as a personality trait, is locus of control. People who think consequences in the world, consequences that affect them, are related to their own behavior, their own attributes to them. Those are internal locus of control people. Versus people who think consequences that impact them are the result of factors outside of themselves, such as luck, fate, powerful others, the system. Those people have an external locus of control. And it's sometimes worth thinking about, who is your audience? Do they tend to be the internal or the external type? Because they respond to different kinds of information regarding behavior change differently. So internal locus of control people who believe they have control over consequences in the world, they tend to respond better to messages that are about autonomy, responsibility, those kinds of message frames. Whereas people who think the world is the source of consequences, factors outside of themselves, such as powerful others, they tend to respond better to behavior change messages that are giving guidance or advice, especially from credible sources. So it's sometimes useful to maybe think about what kind of audience you're talking to, because that may affect the frame you want to take in the way you present your messages. Next. Related to that is the notion of self-efficacy, which is the perception, the belief you can do the behavior. And here we're talking about the perception that you can do the behavior, not the fact that you can do the behavior. Turns out that whether you can or not, if you think you can, you're more likely to engage in the behavior. So the implication here is, as we're presenting our messages, we want to grow a sense of self-efficacy that you can do the behavior that this belief will imply. And to highlight this, it's worth recalling sort of the traditional paradigm of fear-based messages, where you show the awful outcome of doing the behavior you don't want people to do. In those traditional messages, you never show the behavior you do want them to do. You never show them how to do the behavior, so they never sort of start thinking about, can I do the desired behavior? So there's some research showing that if you actually, in your messaging, also show the behavior you want, so people can start to see how to do it, to see that others are doing it, you will grow a sense of self-efficacy, and people will be more likely to eventually engage in that particular behavior. So embedded within your messaging, or whatever strategies you're using to change beliefs to get the behaviors you want, it's recommended from this discussion around self-efficacy to sort of show the behavior you want and try and grow the sense of self-efficacy. Next. The next one is framing, and we've talked, framing is sort of the way, the theme of the story you're telling, how you convey your message in sort of in a value-based sense. And we talked a bit about an example of internal versus external locus of control. If you've got internal audience, you may want to focus on a framing of autonomy and responsibility, whereas if you're external locus of control, you may want to focus more on the sort of sense of giving advice, particularly from a powerful, highly credible person. Another aspect of framing is whether your message communicates gain or loss. So by adopting this belief and engaging in the behavior, are you gaining something positive, or are you getting rid of something negative? Versus a loss frame, where you lose something positive and desirable, or you gain something new that's undesirable. So framing it as a win or a loss does have an effect, although the literature suggests it's fairly small and there's mixed results. But that's something else to think about too. What's the consequence of engaging the behavior? Is it a win or is it a loss? Because that may have an influence on things as well. The literature suggests that we tend to react better to messages that have gains, which also touches on the notion of fear-based messages, which are all about loss, which the literature suggests would be less effective than showing what's the gain of doing the behavior you do want. Next one, Jay. The next few are a bit bigger because the research is a bit stronger, showing that research has more consistency, that these are important influential factors in facilitating belief change. This one called narratives. It's basically storytelling. How do you convey the information? As a headline, as a one sentence fact, alcohol kills, blah, blah, blah. Or do you tell a story about how driving drunk caused an impact to a family and how that changed the family, as an example? As social beings, our social groups, our cultures are supported by storytelling. We share our cultures, we grow our cultures, we celebrate our cultures through a number of means. One is telling stories. A narrative is a story that does contain the key information, but does it in more of a narrative, context-based setting. And we are more responsive to narratives than just statements. It gives us more to engage with. It's the familiar way of how we communicate, narratives of how we share, discuss, debate beliefs. It's something we're just more ready to respond to than simple statements or headlines. Turns out giving narratives either through audio or video is more effective than text, for the next reason we'll discuss now. And that's vividness. Vividness is defined as a message that attracts attention, evokes emotion, and provokes imagination. So does your message capture people's attention? If they don't have attention, they're not going to process it, and you're not going to get any belief change. Does it evoke emotions which motivate thinking about the particular behavior and context? And does it provoke imagination, thinking about it, debating it, going through that belief change process, having conversations with others? This whole process of belief change requires us to engage in conversations internally and with others in our social groups. And this is triggered and motivated and fueled through its vividness. Now, I mentioned the second item was evoke emotions. That does not just mean scary messages. It does not mean just evoking and getting attention through fear or unpleasant emotions. There's lots of research to suggest that positive emotions also attract attention and may actually motivate people to want to create, to start thinking about it, to provoke their imagination. If it's too scary and too unpleasant, people don't want to think about it. And you've shut down that whole vividness process, which is necessary to start the conversations and internally and with others to debate and change beliefs. Next. And the last one I'll mention in the bigger circle list is credibility of the information source. Information that can change a belief is more effective if it's believed to be credible. And credibility is actually two aspects of credibility in a message. First is the source, the person, where the information is coming from. Is it seen to be a credible, unbiased source? An expert, for example, an unbiased person, for example, a source that has a good reputation for factual information, etc. A source that's sort of recognized to care about me, for example. So your source is an important part of credibility. The format and structure of your information can also impact credibility. A sloppy presentation, a messy, overloaded poster, for example, bad graphics, looks like a weak attempt and it's not seen as credible. So how you actually design and format your messaging can enhance the credibility of what you are presenting. Some interesting research, bold text is seen as more credible than soft text with sort of fuzzy boundaries, for example. It's just amazing how we respond to different characteristics of the message, but we do, and that influences the perceived credibility as well. So to be efficient and to be effective and develop the guidance on how to be efficient and effective in our efforts to change beliefs, We need to recognize these facilitating factors and make sure we're leveraging them when we develop our strategies. And those strategies themselves are based on that framework for how beliefs change that we discussed, recognizing that beliefs serve two functions: representational and emotional control. Jay, I think that was my last slide. Or I'll keep going. So what can we take away from this particular section of the presentation? First of all, we move into a belief formation, belief change mode when we perceive something we can't explain, a perturbance. Next. These are unexpected events, and one of our goals is to form a belief that actually explains that event that we currently can't explain. Next. And the other factor is, when we're developing beliefs around an unexpected event, is to form a belief that gets rid of negative emotions, and if possible, creates positive emotions, because beliefs, in addition to helping us understand our world, the beliefs we form also help us regulate our own emotion. So when we go to change beliefs, I think we tend to focus on giving people accurate information, accurate beliefs. But I think the part that we're sometimes missing is the emotional why someone's hanging on to a belief, or the emotional reasons why someone won't accept a belief. So we need to think about the emotional side of this process too. And now I think I'm done.
Now you are. Thank you very much, Nick. That was great. That was a very good summary of what is out in the research, an enormous amount of information about beliefs. So in Nick's research and the team's research, there was clearly, we had to narrow. This is a topic that has been studied for literally thousands of years. And so there's a lot of information. I do encourage you to, if you're interested in this, to look at some of the written documents too. Nick was able to cover some of the key pieces in this brief webinar, but there is more there. And so that final report is available for you to download. It's a PDF, and in it, it has the full review of the literature and more examples and depth to what Nick was talking about. There was also a summary poster. It is designed to be printed on a very large scale, like a poster at a conference session. It is very dense, but it is also just a summary that is interesting, something that you could print, have in different forms, just as a reminder. And then something we want to talk about now is a guidance document that we created to help practitioners make meaning of and use some of this information, because we wanted to look at it from just what was the science saying, but then also how could we distill this to some guidance. And we have to recognize that in the distillation of the guidance, we obviously can't include everything. There's just so much. So this is not meant to be absolutely exhaustive. It is meant to be hopefully more practical. So the guidance document we decided to create it in the form of an assessment. And the idea was that you could use this assessment to sort of look at an activity, what we call here a strategy, you're using to change belief. And I mean, there are lots of different strategies or countermeasures, right? High visibility enforcement is really a strategy or a countermeasure to change people's beliefs, in particular about the perception of getting caught. So you could take your efforts to do high visibility enforcement, and you could use these 11 questions just to sort of ask about some of the aspects around high visibility enforcement that you're doing. Because obviously high visibility enforcement, when it's done well, includes a lot of communication. And so there's this opportunity to address these questions. Maybe not all the questions apply to every strategy, but still it's that opportunity to ask the question. So that's how we designed it. We looked at these 11 questions, and then we also included supportive guidance around each question. So there's a place in the back that you can then look up for each question. What's a little bit of the background behind that? what are some examples or ways that that would manifest in the real world? We also looked at, so the purpose was to help motivate deeper understanding of strategies or countermeasures. Like, how does this effort we're doing with kids in a special presentation, how are we thinking that's going to really change people's beliefs? Or how is my speech to the Rotary Club about traffic safety, how might I think about that as a strategy to change beliefs? So hopefully the 11 questions will help you motivate this deeper understanding. Ideally, it's also identifying areas for improvement and also facilitating shared understanding. So you could do this activity individually, or you could do it with a group of people. And by doing it with a group of people, you might realize some are answering a question very differently than others because of their understanding of how the strategy is implemented or their experience in implementing the strategy. Like, you could think, oh, we're really good at communicating this aspect. And they could say, you know, I don't think we are really good. Like, we don't say that, or we don't go there. So it can also be a tool just to facilitate shared understanding amongst you know, a group of individuals or stakeholders working on it. So the assessment includes 11 questions, and I'm just going to go through those, and you'll see how these questions tie back to the content that Nick was talking about. The first one is just, how well does the strategy seek to change specific beliefs that are linked to specific behaviors? I mean, ultimately, if you're trying to change behavior to improve traffic safety, and you're doing it by changing beliefs, you really got to recognize, like, what are the behaviors I'm trying to grow with this strategy or countermeasure? And then what are the beliefs that I'm trying to change to result in the change in those specific behaviors? And if you can't identify those, it can be really hard to determine, like, am I doing the strategy right? Has the strategy been designed in such a way, and am I implementing it in such a way that I'm really getting at those specific beliefs? If I don't even know what they are, it's hard to tell. So that this is a hard question, but it's a really important question. How well does the strategy foster slow thinking? Nick he alluded to it. He didn't label it as fast or slow thinking, but some of our belief formation occurs without us even realizing. It's very fast. So it's unconscious, and we do it all the time. If we stop to think about every belief we form, we'd be stalled all day long. So it's like he said, our brains are belief engines. So they do this very quickly and can be unconsciously. But to change a belief, we might really need to put people into slow thinking so that they can examine that belief that they have and have a greater opportunity to potentially change it. How does the strategy create cognitive dissonance without shame? If we're trying to create change in a belief, we need that perturbance. If we don't create the perturbance, we might not ever get them to start to examine and go through other aspects of belief change. Now, we don't want to have the unintended consequences of creating shame, which may cause them to withdraw and not engage in the process. But we do need to create some cognitive dissonance. How does the strategy grow perceived self-efficacy, like Nick talked about? Can I see myself living into the new belief and the new behavior? Or is it something I feel like I don't relate, I can't do that, I couldn't do that? So perceived self-efficacy becomes a component. And then how is emotion used in the strategy? Nick talked a lot about that in this. I think it's very insightful to think about beliefs as supporting certain emotions. And therefore, we've got to think a lot about the role of emotion used in a strategy. What emotion are we bringing about? How is that being done very intentionally so that we are creating some energy from that emotion? How does the strategy use narrative? Nick talked about the value and importance of narrative. So how is narrative coming out? Are we just putting up data? Are we just putting up a fact? Or how are we telling a story? How vivid is the strategy? He talked a lot about that. How credible is the source? That was another key factor. To what degree might the strategy evoke psychological reactance? We didn't talk about that in this session, but there's some good guidance about that in the guidance document. There's also a whole other project we did for the pooled fund looking at psychological reactants in the context of seatbelt usage and aggressive driving. To what degree does the strategy grow misperceptions of normative beliefs or behaviors? We don't want to unintentionally create misperceptions about what is typical or expected in our culture, because there's research that shows when we create those misperceptions, we might actually make the behavior worse instead of better. And to what degree does the strategy stigmatize certain people? We've got to think more and more about the impacts of stigma, especially when we think about issues like impaired driving. It's interesting to note, like, Mothers Against Drunk Driving changed their name, right? They used to be Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And then they shifted to focus on the behavior and not the people, because the people, many of the people who are engaging in drunk driving have a substance use disorder and need treatment. And we want to create mechanisms where stigma doesn't get in the way of that treatment. So thinking about stigma is another component. So the supportive guidance around each one of those 11 questions includes some background. It pulls a little bit from Nick's research. It talks about why this matters, and then it gives some suggestions and examples. So for each one of those questions, there's a lot more information in this guidance document that helps you navigate that. All right, so we were able to quickly talk about what are beliefs, how are beliefs formed, and how are beliefs changed. We briefly talked about the resources. So those are available on the website right now. You can download those and share those with others. Feel free to share them, print them, however you'd like to use them would be fine. Now we want to have a moment to check in on some of the questions. So I know you've put questions in the Q&A box. That's great. I said here the chat box, but either one is fine. The QA box works very well as also. So one came up, do you have any tips for how to balance narrative against the media news cycle and short clips of information? Yeah, that's a tough one, right? When we're looking at a news system which is selling product and is using various strategies to sell product, it is difficult. So I think the notion Nick had shared some ideas. I would suggest it is not short clips versus narrative. Like, we don't have to oppose them. We can think about short clips as being very short stories, right? We can tell a story very quickly. So we want to think about how to still be short, still grab attention, but still have the notion of a story. We put in the link. Yeah, somebody asked for the link to the where this project exists and all the pooled fund projects. It's also really easy to pop up if you Google MDT traffic safety culture, and it'll pop right up. Another question, how can we best trigger precursor events in our messaging? Yeah, many people in our priority audiences have deeply held beliefs and may not take a moment to consider our message. For example, if someone doesn't think they're a dangerous driver because they think everyone speeds, they may not consider our message about speeding enough to serve as a precursor event or a trigger deeper thinking about it. That is a tremendous challenge. And I think one of the things we recognize at the center is that messaging and communication campaigns are not the only ways to do this. And in some ways may be very difficult and limiting. I think what we would say if we are thinking about messaging is it's going to take a long time and a lot of dosage. And there are some people for whom it is very difficult to reach that way. But I think it's important to recognize and explore other ways that we might foster those precursor events. Could we get somebody closer to that individual in a conversation with them? Could we get somebody who's in the vehicle to ask somebody not to speed or ask them to wear a seatbelt? Could we get a family to have more of those conversations? Could we get workplaces to have more of those conversations? So I think we have to broaden our thinking about just using traditional campaigns, but even within traditional campaigns, yeah, it's hard, but how can we create things that invite people in? That might be asking questions or doing different things like that. But your question is a good one. It's a hard question. It's not an easy question to answer. And that's where much of the work is. So I'm mindful of our time. I just want to include a few things. So some other current projects that we're engaged in that you can keep your eyes out. We're doing a project about reducing multi-risk driving behaviors. So this is particularly looking at individuals who engage in multiple risky behaviors, like not wearing a seatbelt, speeding, and impaired driving. And might we approach them differently? And we're also about to start a project on resources and tools to improve pedestrian safety. Now, my colleague, Kelly Green, has let me know not all of the products for this project, the Belief System Project, are up on the website yet. They will be up very soon. So we'll also be sending out a follow-up email to this webinar. We'll remind you about that. We can put a link to their website too, but they should be up very soon. But the final products might not be up quite yet. So these are just a couple of other things that we just include for the recording. Do know that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on for future review. So we'll send out a link to that, and a link to that I think will also be on the MDT website. Well, we really appreciate you joining us for this hour. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. And we absolutely really appreciate all your work to improve traffic safety and engage in this challenging but exciting work to change beliefs so that we can also change behaviors and grow healthier and safer traffic safety cultures. So thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.